Well, I hope you all are having a really great night. You can probably imagine that when I try to start a sermon, one of the things I'm trying to think about is how to start it in a really encouraging way, especially since this is good news, even if there are a lot of us who are bad Christians, right? So I'm going to try that out on you today. Here's my opening line. This sermon is probably going to fail. The sermon is probably going to fail. I mean, the chances of this sermon failing are as high as any sermon I've ever preached. And you might think, well, why is that, Greg? Why is this sermon going to fail? And the answer is kind of interesting the way I think about it, because I've never actually preached this sermon before, or a sermon that was exactly on this theme. So I guess I don't know whether it's going to fail in a crowd like this. But interestingly, I've had this conversation with lots of people across the table. And the truth is, usually conversations across the table have a better effect than the ones from a platform. And all the time when I have this conversation across the table, it fails. I've had this conversation 100 times, probably hundreds of times, with different people in different situations. And I think I could count on one hand the number of times where I thought, it worked. Now, it is true, and this sometimes happens in pastoral conversations, that sometimes people would just tell me basically right in the conversation, no, I'm not going to do that. Most of the time with their pastor, people say, oh, that's a good idea, I'm going to do that. And then they don't do it. I don't know how few of times people have actually followed through on this. So maybe that's not good news tonight, but it's probably going to fail. So I thought maybe instead of coming straight at this one, I should kind of come through the side door, trick you somehow, make this seem appealing to you, and maybe that would work. I was inspired this week because I came across this news story. Maybe some of you saw it. Jerry Davich shared this on his Facebook feed. There's a grocery store in Canada that's trying to convince people to bring their own reusable bags. I mean, we're in 2019, right? You should be bringing your own reusable bags to the grocery store, but lots of people still don't do it, and so they're just using plastic after plastic after plastic. So what this grocery store decided to do, I love this, they decided to print bags, not with their store name on it, but with fake store names on it, so as to embarrass people if they were carrying these bags. Here's the first bag. Did you see this? The wart ointment wholesale. You're walking out of the grocery store and you're walking all around. That's what you need, wart ointment. Next one's even worse. Look at this. Into the Weird adult video emporium, and you're carrying around your groceries. And here's the end of the story. It didn't work. People decided these are novelties, right? This is awesome. And so they actually start liking to have those bags, and the side door didn't work at all. So I've decided I'm not going to try to come through the side door. But maybe this one will work if I could somehow approach it from a higher plane, from a transcendent sort of way, that if I could help you to think more the way God thinks, maybe this one, will work. So this picture that's going to be on the screen next, I show you all the time. Usually I explain it in some very quick statements as I walk across the stage. This is creation, broken, redemption, restoration. And what I want to do with this today is not just explain it as I go across the platform, but to spend a little time with it so we can see it in the way God sees it and maybe experience it in a different way than you've experienced it before. So creation, I always say this, God created the world just the way he wanted it to be. You read Genesis 1, it was perfect. People talked with God freely. There was no inhibitions. There were no barriers. They related to one another perfectly. There was no heartbreak. There was no pain. It was beautiful. Creation was just the way that God wanted the world to be. He gave human beings this free will. Human beings could choose either to worship and honor and obey God, or choose to dishonor and rebel and do their own thing. Adam and Eve chose to do their own thing. Greg and Jenny probably would have done the same thing. But the moment that happened, it brought this brokenness into the world. Now, every time when I describe the brokenness, the room always gets really quiet. And I think what's happening is everyone's resonating with it. Because we all understand the world we live in is a very broken world. And this world, and all the injustices attached to it, is really nothing like the way God wanted it to be. And the heartache and the pain and the shame and all that, it's not good. But here's what I need you to think about today. I want you to spend just a minute with me thinking about your experience with the brokenness of this world. So that when I name brokenness, it's not just this thing out there, but I'm curious, when you think about this broken world and how it's so wrong, like what do you think about? What is it that bothers you? Where is it when you look at it, you say, that's not right? Where is it that you've experienced the pain or the collateral damage of someone else's stuff? Or, frankly, you've experienced the pain of your own poor decision. Where is that in this brokenness conversation? Now, whenever I'm in a one-on-one conversation with someone and I start to go this direction, I'll stop and ask them. So I'll stop and ask you, so tell me about that a little bit. What is it that bothers you? What is it that you'd complain about it? What is it that you think that's not right with the world? And almost without fail, and maybe this is what you're thinking, I hope you're thinking of some brokenness. Almost without fail, people think of brokenness that personally affects them. I mean, we are the recipients of this damage in this world in some ways. Parts of it, no doubt, hit your life like they hit my life. And we start to view the brokenness of this world as a problem that we have to receive or deal with. And it's true. There's brokenness in this world that you have to receive and you have to deal with. But it is amazing to me how self-focused we get when we dive into this conversation about brokenness. You see, everyone feels that the world is a little unfair, and mostly we think about how the world is unfair to us. And you can kind of pick your category. This is true of national social issues right now. I'm not going to pick sides on an immigration debate, but it's all around this issue. I'm not going to pick sides on any social debate. But people see the world and how it's affecting them, and then they respond to the brokenness that's hitting them. Maybe we could narrow that down a little bit. All of us have occupations, right? Most of us are working. And what's fascinating to me is almost everyone has a view of their occupation and kind of where they're getting the short end of the stick. Listen, I respect teachers in Indiana. A lot of teachers I talk to, they feel like they're getting the short end of the stick. I have that conversation all the time. I talk to pastors all the time, and I got to tell you, this lives large among pastors nationally. Like, pastors have a little bit of a victim mentality sometimes because the work is so tough, and the expectations are so high, and the hours are so long, and and oh, poor us, pastors. And sometimes I'll talk to a police officer. I have a police officer who's a friend of mine, and they'll talk about kind of all the dilemmas they face while they're going through their job these days, trying to be a police officer. And my brother is in agriculture, and all the farmers today, if you talk to the farmers, it's about all the problems, how things are worked and stacked against them to make any money. And if you talk to a steel worker, or you talk to a business owner, or you talk to, everyone has your own story. Everyone has their own story about how the brokenness is coming downstream to them. And here's the truth. It is. It is. Of course, it's not just in workplace, right? There's in your family system, your household, maybe your extended family system. If I ask you about the brokenness in your family system, almost all of you could name that brother-in-law or that uncle or your dad or whoever it was, and they've done something wrong, and you're living downstream from it, and you're experiencing the consequences of someone else's brokenness. And it's not untrue, but it's how we tend to always think about it. This happens generationally. Some people who are a little older love to take shots at the millennials. Love to take shots at the millennials. They kind of put themselves up on a perch and then take their shots. And you know how millennials react to that? They say, well, I'm a millennial. That's unfair. Do you know what's wrong with you? Like, am I the one who got... I'm not going to start the argument, right? But whatever generation you're a part of, you tend to think you stand in judgment of someone else's problems. Very rarely does a millennial raise their hand and say, you know what the problem is? Millennials. And very rarely does a boomer raise their hand and say, you know what the problem is? Boomers. Almost all the time, when we see brokenness, because we are experiencing it, We see it through our own lens and our own experience. Now, that's about the most human thing possible, but here's what I'm telling you. That is a low-level way of seeing the world. And even if I start to pick at this scab a little bit and say, you know what, people in today's world are too easily offended. There's too much of a victim mentality. In almost every crowd I'd be with, everyone shakes their head, yes, agrees, and thinks of someone else. That is the problem, Greg. People are too easily offended. You know, those people over there, they're too easily offended. That's brokenness. And I think it's part of why brokenness isn't getting better. So, that's brokenness. We're going to talk about that. Let me finish the story here just real quick because it's really important for today. Redemption. This is Christ coming into the world about 2,000 years ago. Don't miss this. The one who was without sin, who became sin for us. And though we were sinners, he died for us. And for those of us in the room who are followers of Jesus, I mean, you can potentially even think back to that moment in your life where you came to that realization, and it's just overwhelming that God's love for you and me is so great that he would die for us when he didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who did it wrong. But he brought redemption. And then there's restoration, which is the view to say, once I've experienced redemption in Christ, and I could never repay God for what he's done, the thing he asks me to do is look at all the broken parts of this world, all the places where the world is not the way God wants it to be, and just be part of the solution. Just give yourself to something that's greater than yourself, to live life on a higher plane, to not be the person who just consumes this life and soaks it up and catches it downstream, but instead to be the person who says, it's wrong that kids are growing up without parents. And I have a house with extra bedrooms. So maybe, since I think that's wrong and I have resources, I could be part of that solution. That was mine. That wasn't yours. Probably wasn't yours. But if you would look around at the brokenness of this world and say, oh, that's why I'm here. After what God has done for me, I'm going to engage that. That's why this is so important. So, all that to set up 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and 10. This is 2 chapters long. We're covering lots of stuff really fast, and I'm going to read you a lot of this passage tonight. It's a very interesting passage, and I didn't even have enough room in the program to print the whole thing, so this first section I'm reading, you don't even have in your program. It's on kind of a sensitive topic, honestly. I don't think I've ever talked about it before. This is about paying your pastor. How about that? Paying your pastor. So the Apostle Paul is writing. He's been a pastor. He's been an apostle. He's doing the work of God. He's preaching. And he's talking about how you deserve to be paid for it. Now, Paul was not paid for it. He was a tent maker. He had a job on the side to provide his own income. I want you to follow his line here. Here's how it goes. He says, am I not free? I have freedom. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment of me. Now, it's going to sound like he's whining here at the start, and maybe he is a little bit. But that'll help us to relate to it, because we like to whine a little bit. And what he starts to say is, there's these people sitting in judgment of me. Like, if you're a leader, you know, you got people sitting in judgment, and the judgment is sometimes they're accusing you. Most of the time in today's world, a lot of the things that we call judgment are feeling unappreciated for what we've done. You start to feel, He says, don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us? There were people looking at him and saying, you're a pastor. You probably shouldn't get married. You should devote your whole life to this. People just standing in judgment of him, telling him how to live his life. It goes on. He says, who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Soldiers don't do that. Who plants a vineyard and doesn't at least eat some of the grapes? Who tends a flock and does not drink the milk? He's given just real life examples. And after some real life examples, he hits them with a Bible example. Here's what he says. For it's written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle the ox while it is treading out the grain. He says, it's crazy to think about the people who are teaching and preaching to you like this. Like while they're trying to do God's work at the same time, you're not even paying them to give it. He says it's crazy. It's crazy. Then he goes on. He says, surely he says this for us, for pastors, apostles, doesn't he? Yes, this was written for us because whoever plows and threshes should be able to do so in hope of sharing in the harvest. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? He's not waiting for them to answer the question. He's made the case. But here's what he's doing. He's doing just what I described before. He's the pastor. He's the apostle. He's not getting paid. And he's setting up this scenario where he says, it's not right. And you would expect that the very next thing out of his mouth would be, so pay us. Address the brokenness that's your fault and I'm the victim of. Address it. But he does the exact opposite. That's how powerful this is. He says, but we did not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. And this is why nobody likes to take this message to heart. Because the message goes something like this. You're enduring brokenness. There are other people who are being unjust to you. You're on the receiving end of things that aren't fair. Here's the message for you. Endure it. Here's the message for you. Swallow it. Here's the message for it. Don't fight against your own injustice. But I have not used any of these rights, and I am not writing this in hope that you will do such things for me. I'm not writing it so you send me a paycheck. I'm not writing it so you send me money. That is not why I'm writing this. He says, though I am free and I belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. He said, when injustice kind of flows down the river and I am the victim of it, legitimately the victim of it. If you live on this kind of low plane in life, the natural reaction is to fight for your own rights. He said, but there's a different way to live, a more important way to live, something that would help win as many as possible. What's he talking about, win as many as possible? He's talking about the redemption piece. He says, I've seen what Christ did for me. I didn't deserve that. I'll put up with things I don't deserve so that more people can experience that redemption. I'll fight for them instead of fighting for me. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. He says, here's what I'm clear about. I know what the goal is. He goes on. He's going to give a lot of examples. He says, to those under the law, I became like one under the law, even though I wasn't under the law, so as to win those under the law. He says, the goal is to bring about redemption and restoration. The goal is not to solve my injustices, so I'm willing to endure my injustices so that others can experience the beauty of who God is. He says, to those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I'm not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law, so as to win those who are not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I've become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. There's a lot bigger thing going on in this world than the injustices that are flowing my direction. And instead of taking up the flag of the injustices that I'm enduring, how powerful would it be to say, I won't fight for my own rights. I won't give my energy and attention to making you treat me fairly. There's something way more important than that. And it's actually in light of someone who gave me a great gift. Now, last weekend I wasn't here. I was teaching at one of our new churches in Indianapolis. It was awesome. Echo Church, they're less than 2 years old, doing amazing things already, seeing all these baptisms. It's very satisfying to make a relatively small investment and just see the fruit that's getting produced from it. But I had a lot of people come up and say thank you to me, which meant thank you to you for your generosity and Suncrest outward investment in that. But I had a couple people say, Greg, 21 years ago, Suncrest was where Echo is now, but now look what's happened through Suncrest. What's the secret, right? As if there's a secret. And I have an answer for that. I've been asked that actually many times, so I have a answer. I say there is no secret, but I will tell you two things. First, God has been very good to us. This is the work of God, and we're trying to live open-handed to wherever God leads us. God's been good to us. Second, if there's anything that collectively as a church Suncrest has been good at, it's been good at being unselfish. And God blesses that over and over again. We give away all kinds of money. We share all kinds of leadership. We try to reach people that aren't even part of our church, and we ask all of our people in our church to be more unselfish, to reach more people. Like, it's just a posture. And of course, that's the posture of Paul here. He says, to the weak, I become weak, because it's not about me. It's not. It's about the calling, the purpose that we all have. And this is kind of fascinating to me. Some of you've heard me say, Suncrest has kind of this, it's not a secret. It's a stated intention to say we got to keep getting younger as a church. And it's really wild. I used to be in my 20s, and when someone said we should get younger as a church, I'm like, yeah. And then I used to be in my 30s, and people would say we should get younger, like reach young families as a church. I'm like, yeah. And now I'm in my 40s, and in order to reach people who are younger than me, now our church does things that I don't even like sometimes. And I'm like, yeah. Because I would become like a 20-year-old to try to win a 20-year-old. Because it's not who I am, but this isn't about who I am. And for Suncrest, it's never been about who we are. It's always about trying to bring redemption and restoration to this broken world. And when we can work that out collectively and we each can work that out individually, it is powerful. He says, therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating in the air. I don't live my life trying to find some satisfying thing, and I chase this, and then I buy that, and then I date her, and then I do, I'm not just searching out there for what it is that'll matter. I know what matters. The redemption and restoration of this world really matters, and I am single-focused, Paul says. I am not a runner running aimlessly, and I am not a boxer fighting in the air. This is what we're doing. And it is not about the injustices that I'm facing. Then he gives this wild example from the Old Testament. Some of you know this story. I'll try to do it real quick. So Israel was in slavery for many, many years. God delivered them out of that slavery. Amazing, right? He had them walk across the Red Sea, like through the Red Sea. He parted it. Amazing, right? Cloud by day, fire by night. He was leading them in ways that were obvious. Amazing, right? And what happens to the nation of Israel when they're in the desert? They start grumbling and complaining. And all of a sudden, it's still poor me. God just brought them out of slavery, showed them a miracle across the Red Sea, leads them every day, complaining. Why? Because life was hard, and they were facing injustice. There were things that weren't fair, and they got very self-focused on the injustice they were facing. Here's what Paul says. He says, now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. That thing in the Old Testament, part of it occurred so we could see how messed up that was. Do not grumble, as some of them did. Don't get so self-focused when the work of God is going on in a higher plane all around you that you're just very focused on yourself. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. So I'm not going to make you raise your hands here, but I do have a couple of serious questions for you, and I want you to think about it in terms of would I raise my hand. How many of you have a victim mentality? Just be honest about it. It's not the other people who have a victim mentality, it's you. How many of you have a victim mentality? How many of you are easily offended? How many of you find yourself complaining, or let's just call it talking, that makes it easier. Just talking to friends, family, other people about how you're getting the short end of the stick, or the people in your group, your generation, your tribe, your race, your gender, your whatever, you're getting the short end of the stick. How many of you are like that? So if you just thought to yourself, that's me. I'm like that. I play the victim. I get easily offended. This is the surprising part of the message where I say, that's awesome. That's really healthy. It's really healthy that you could see it in yourself. Because then you'll have the chance to say, no, I don't want to keep doing that. I want to live life on a higher plane. But no doubt there's probably a whole crowd in this room. When I was describing that, you think, yeah, that's not me. I'm not a victim. I get really frustrated at other people who play the victim. Me, I'm not an offended person. It's all those other people who are offended people. I wish they'd get their act together. And I think this is what the audience Paul is speaking to when he says, so if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. I mean, it is possible that if in your mind all those other people are playing the victim, I mean, you're following me here, right? It is possible if in your mind it's everyone else who's playing the victim, that you might be playing the victim. Those problems with all those other people, if they just stop playing the victim, those are the problems we're all enduring. Oh, wait a second. I'm describing what other people are doing, that I'm experiencing the brokenness. I'm the victim. This is tricky, friends. This is why this message almost never works. Because I'll walk out into the commons area and someone will come up to me. This is going to happen tonight, I promise you. Someone's going to come up to me and say, you know what? My brother-in-law needed that message tonight. That message should be played from radio stations because our world needs that message tonight. But you don't think you needed the message tonight. That's why it always fails. It's very tempting to think of it that way. And this verse, which you may know, you may not know, was in this context. Here's what he says. No temptation has overtaken you except what's common to man. It's very common to people to think they're the victim, but not think of themselves as a victim mentality. And God's faithful. He won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you're tempted, he will provide a way out so that you can endure it. And then Paul kind of finishes out the chapter this way. Let me just follow this. I have the right to do anything, you say. He says, that's true. There's a lot of freedom in Christ. You have the right to do anything. But not everything's beneficial. Could we live on a little higher plane than just saying what my rights are? And instead saying, what would make a difference? Because sure, you can do lots of things. But let's focus on what's beneficial. I have the right to do anything, you say. But not everything's constructive. So let's not live in our rights or what I have the right to do or what I should have the freedom to do. Let's do things that are constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. If you're following along on the outline, you should circle that and underline it and memorize it. If you're not following along on the outline, you should write this down right now. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Yeah, we're going to get to 1 Corinthians 13 here in just a few weeks. It's going to say, what is love? Love is not self-seeking. And God loves us, and he calls on us to love God and love our neighbor. And the whole way to live in this world is not self-seeking. Not to demand my rights, not to just get upset about the injustices that flow down the river to me, but to care about the other. He says it again, for I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. Follow my example. That's what Paul's saying. He's saying, I deserve to be paid, but I'm not asking you to pay me. I'm not fighting for my own victimhood. I'm deciding to fight for somebody else's. You do that too. Who am I following, you ask? I'm following Christ. Guess what he did? The one who had no sin, the one who had done nothing wrong, the one who only experienced injustice, the only one who ever experienced it but didn't create it, came and gave his life for the people who were treating him wrong. This is what followers of Jesus do. It's what Jesus did, and we're not just trying to learn about the life that Jesus lived. We're trying to learn to live the life that Jesus lived. And when he decided not to complain about his own injustice, but just to endure it, and then go off and do things on others' behalves. I mean, I don't know how that sounds to you. I'm just telling you, if you live life on a higher plane, you'll start to capture, this actually could be beautiful. So let me just name it as clearly as I can. A lot of us are bad Christians. There's good news here. Good news, followers of Jesus have a clear purpose. It's not confusing. If you're a follower of Jesus, you don't have to be confused about why you live in this world. Here's the answer. It's for the redemption and restoration of this world. And it's not just a church, and it's not just a pastor who would say, to the Jews I became a Jew, to the weak I became weak, to those under the law I became under the law. I'd give up myself so as to help others experience redemption in Christ. That's what we all do. And it means paying attention to who someone else is and living in their world. Because this isn't about the injustices done to us. And the restoration of this broken world is about us looking around at the brokenness that's in this world, and not just the stuff that's coming down the stream to us, but to see how someone else is facing injustice and advocate for them. Redemption and restoration, if you're a follower of Jesus, it's why you breathe. Give your life to nothing else. Certainly give your life to nothing lesser. But put yourself up on this plane and say, man, that kind of life. I won't be punching into the wind. I won't be running aimlessly. This is crystal clear. This is my life. And then, more good news for those of us who are bad Christians. Followers of Jesus have a clear posture. Here's that clear posture. It is to fight for the other instead of yourself. So whatever group you're a part of and whatever victimhood you experience because you are a teacher or a pastor or a farmer or a business owner or a steel worker, whatever it is, whatever generation you're a part of, and whenever you feel like, you know what, I'm going to kind of push down those other generations, kind of pat my own generation on the back, we just all stop doing that. It's true, there's injustices that are coming to you, but we just decide we're not going to fight on those. We're going to fight for the other. Which means this: rarely a victim, always an advocate. I almost said never a victim. But some of you have experienced such intense pain. Man, in a crowd this size, someone in this room was raped once. I'm sure of it. And when you experience an intensity of an injustice like that, I'm not trying to tell you tonight, get over it. But man, unless you experience something that intense, then just say, no, I'm not a victim. I'm not. What this world needs at a higher plane is to be an advocate. And listen, I know I'm your pastor, and I kind of flow in and out of this higher plane and lower plane myself, but I know I'm in the right place, the best place, the most satisfying place when I'm in the higher plane. And I don't know if any of you have ever led somebody to redemption. But if you had a hand in helping someone become a follower of Jesus and experience the grace of God, you know those are your best moments in life. And I don't know if you've ever gone in deep with someone who's getting bullied or beat up or was on the short end of the stick from a justice perspective, but you decided I'm gonna risk things. I'm gonna risk my reputation. I'm gonna go for it. It's gonna cost me, but I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna help them. And you did help them, and they came back to you and said, "Thank God for somebody like you." It's the best life there is. So maybe this will fail. I don't know. But it's good news. Let me pray for it. God, we need you to help us see where we complain about what's happening to us so that we can let you redeem that and we can get to work helping people experience redemption and restoration. In Jesus' name.